This episode of Make Something Cool is brought to you by Riverside, the leading podcast and video recording platform. We are massive fans of Riverside. We literally use it to make every episode of Make Something Cool. We can't live without it anymore. And we are not the only ones. Guy Raz of How I Built This uses it. Gary Vee uses it. Companies like Spotify and the New York Times use it. It's the best. So if you are trying to record a podcast or create video content, go check out Riverside today. You can hit the link in the description and the show notes of this episode to go check it out. We couldn't recommend it enough. So go check out Riverside. This is Make Something Cool. I'm Alex Sugg, and today I am sitting down with Joshua Ariza. And Joshua is a designer and illustrator who has worked with brands like Nike, Netflix, Disney, and a ton of other huge names. And he is also the owner of the Chomp clothing brand. And he's just one of my favorite designers out there, one of my favorite tweeters out there. So I'm super excited to have you on, Joshua. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess to start, I want to say, before we hit record, I let you know, I think if I had to guess, like 70 to 80% of the people who listen to the show are some sort of visual designer, whether the illustrators or graphic designers or brand designers. That just seems like a huge portion of the audience. And so that's why I was excited to have you on, because you kind of touch all of those in a really unique way. And so I guess just to set some of the groundwork, how did you get introduced to design in like a more professional way? Like, how did you first get into design?
Yeah, my first right out of college job was in the surf industry for Billabong. And I was designing t-shirts and board shorts, which the irony there is like when I took that job, like my professors kind of like sold it to me like, I don't know if you're going to really want this job. And then when I got the job, everyone else who I would talk to, I told them what I did. They're like, dude, that's a dream job. So there was this like funny little, like looked down on by the, old world designer advertiser people, but, looked at from, just a layman's standpoint of view that it was like a very covetous job. So yeah, that's what I did. And then, I just learned a lot about textiles and manufacturing and line planning and all these things that are very specific to, wholesale and retail and selling product. And so then I kind of leveraged that to get a job at Nike. So I worked at Nike doing, Nike Active Sports, Nike SB, Nike Women's Sportswear. And then I've been on my own for the last like 8 years.
That's awesome, man. So what exactly on like the day-to-day were you doing for Billabong? How did you get that job too?
Honestly, just drawing a lot of snakes and skulls, and then taking the logo.
I mean, what do you expect? Yeah,
I don't know, man. It's fucking the exact same as it was before. Sorry, So,
oh yeah,
I think I cut my teeth doing that kind of thing, and if it's the truth about all that stuff is, like people are buying into a brand. Usually, they're not really buying into like my illustration style necessarily. So, I mean. People wore Billabong because it was a cool surf brand. And if I sold some t-shirts with some snakes and skulls on it too, I was very stoked. So yeah, kind of day-to-day designing t-shirts, sometimes repeating pattern prints that would end up on like, a jacket or a jacket liner or a board short or something like that. So yeah, really just like ankle to waist deep in like learning how to make product that gets manufactured en masse,
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm curious, like, what were you doing before that? Did you go to college for design? Were you like...
Yeah, I went to college for design. I thought I was going to be an advertiser. Everyone fucking thought they were going to be in advertising. But back then, you went to school and like, I'm going to be making a campaign. I'm going to be doing Don Draper stuff, And then I just simultaneously entered into the work world during the collapse of the housing bubble, and then also really the collapse of like good big campaign advertising that kind of just had to give into the needs of content marketing and digital marketing that really has a much smaller snapshot of how to interact with your consumers. So all that like big campaign, like this year is going to be about just do it or whatever, like these giant campaigns, like. That became very coveted work, very hard to like get into and very big agency of record type work. And then I got into it was kind of like the web design thing was like a big thing. So I dabbled in web design and I was like the shittiest web designer of all time, like seriously really bad at it, not good at coding. I didn't like CSS or style sheets or anything like that. And basically failed at doing that so much that I kind of was forced into being like an illustrator more.
Okay.
I mean, I always liked illustrating more, but there just wasn't, I didn't understand whether the space was there, how to make a career out of it. So
Right.
I got kind of lucky in the way that, it's easily applied to apparel. And then like not to get too ethereal about it, but like apparel's a great canvas for artwork, right? But then it also made me realize that like really anything could have artwork on it, you know? I mean, we kind of just like, we think in these very, very narrow ways. Like we have art on our walls and we have art in our clothes, but like art can be on anything. I have surfboards with art on it. I have skateboards with art on it. I have, I have socks with art on it. I have playing cards with art on it. And so I really just kind of, once I left Nike, realized that I just wanted to put art on as many things as possible. Put digital, art's a flimsy term, but put literally illustration and design on as many things as possible. So I have a bicycle that, I don't know if you can see back there. Barely can see it. It's red. It's behind. It's very awesome. There's a bike that has
sick
design on it that I did for New Belgium. So, and at this point in my career, is just put as many graphics on as many objects as possible.
I like that. That's a cool approach. I'm curious. So like and that's a huge part of, I've always wondered, like kind of following you from afar, like what your time split is between doing freelance brand work versus Chomp, your clothing company. What does that look like? Is it just kind of a mismatch depending on seasons?
I think it's probably 90% work for hire and then probably 10% on the brand.
Okay.
The brand, in order to keep the life going, requires like a few graphics a month or something like that. And design, I mean, anyone who runs a brand knows that like design is really like the fun part. And then there's this whole like operational marketing, sourcing, manufacturing thing that has to exist in the background. And that requires as much time or a lot more usually. Then you contract out a lot of that stuff. So I would say 10% of my time is doing on Chomp and then the other 90% on whatever client work for hire stuff. So, I mean, most of my time is just like branding, illustration, that kind of stuff. And then for Chomp, like it has this interesting like business model in that like the wholesale side, it has like a distributor who runs like all the manufacturing and all the sales and stuff like that. And then I really just run like the e-com portion and I'm in charge of obviously the art and marketing.
Sure.
And so it's a really great partnership that I have with my distributor and it's all of a sudden much more profitable than it was before. And that's, to the power of people who are fucking good at their jobs. And, I was never like the best sales guy,
Sure.
But like was able to manage a low 6-figure wholesale business and they've turned the volume up quite a bit. So, it's cruising now and we book on futures, which means like we book product into the future, like a season or two ahead on occasion. And so it's just a lot.
That's cool.
It's a lot more a real business than it was. And it still really only requires 10% of my time. So in terms of like the balance of time, it's like a way less time on Chomp, but in terms of the balance of like profitability, makes way more money.
That's crazy. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious with, I think of people who are maybe want to do something similar, especially in the clothing and apparel space. That feels like really treacherous to me of like the cost of goods and doing all that stuff, especially in like the digital world where it's like you can build digital products or whatever. I had Jack Butcher on recently and I had Steph Smith on recently, and they both like all they do is build physical or digital products. And so I'm curious, like for you, there has to be a lot of risk, one, but then also what are some things that you like learned along the way of having an actual clothing company? Because that's pretty risky right now.
Yeah. Oh, it's a super high risk asset. Like when I talk to people who kind of work in like, either startups or people who work at capital companies that like either purchase companies or supercharge them with money or whatever. When I talk to people, like turns out apparel is like a super high risk asset, like for someone's portfolio. I don't want to talk in like very industry terms, so I don't want to like lose your audience with it. But like the way that I've chosen to grow Chomp is about eliminating as much of the waste on either the design side or the sampling side or the sourcing sides of things. And that's really just, waste in terms of like, it costs a lot of money to develop a sample that like looks like this and then not use it. Right. So there's like, you use the design time, then you use the production and sampling time. And it's just like, it's a lot of waste. Right. And so a lot of apparel companies, they have have a SKU count. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with SKU counts, but like, let's say there's 5 different t-shirt styles in your assortment, right? So they all have different graphics on them. But within that style, you actually have 5 sizes, right? So you might have so in that just 5, you have 25 SKUs. So 5 times 5, you have 25. So that's how difficult. And then you have to budget, like how many are we going to order of each of these?
Right.
And then how many are we going to sell of each of these? So inevitably one sells way better than the other. And then one size sells a lot better than the other. So it just becomes a very risky thing, right?
Yep.
So there's some ways around that in terms of working with your retailers, in terms of budgeting and kind of offloading a lot of risk more towards them and them doing the hard work of actually just selling it. And then, so it's been about, I'm just giving you an example there. It's been about eliminating as much time and waste as possible and not betting too hard and too big on certain things. I think a lot of like designers who eventually want to start their own product-based business bet too hard that the design will sell itself. And then they buy too deep in the amount of assets they might, if it's prints or posters or whatever else, or enamel pins or some shit. At least enamel pins, like they don't take up any space. You can put them like a drawer.
Right.
But like if you start to buy bigger things, they might take up a lot of space. So just when you bootstrap a brand, like you're just a lot likelier to be resourceful. And that's the thing that like companies that either start with a lot of money or have a lot of money don't realize, like the bloat or the waste, and when you're inside of a company working there, you can immediately just tally up how all the things cost, all the personnel costs, and, and I'm just fortunate that whatever my career has been like, has been me learning a lot of things and knowing how to do a lot of things, and those things leveraging how to do those things. Like, for example, like I know how to make a repeating pattern print. I know how to separate all my artwork. I understand roller printing, screen printing, and all these, DTG. I understand how all these things get made, and I kind of understand sort of how they cost usually in the long run. So it's just like designers sometimes aren't always tasked with knowing those things in a big organization. Right. So
no, that makes a lot of sense to me, talking about like that ability to be resourceful. I think that's something interesting to talk about here. So when the fact that you learned those things, did that come, I guess, let me frame it this way. Did that experience come from working within a big organization first? So does that come from your time at Billabong and Nike, and then you get to translate that into your own thing? Or is it stuff that you, over the last 8 years that you've been on your own, you've accumulated, like understanding how to do the pattern, the way that, like all that stuff that you just described? Like, because I think there are lots of people out there now who, they don't know how to get that entry point to a job like that, or maybe they aren't there yet in order to understand how to acquire all that knowledge or whatever beforehand. I'm curious how you learned it, and maybe like in today, like in 2021, like what somebody can do. For me, I'm always just like what's that term? Pick up a shovel, like a figure it out kind of guy. Like just Google university or whatever. But I'm curious if you have anything more helpful than my suggestion around that for somebody who would want to learn how to be more resourceful in that way.
I mean, when I mentor young designers, or when I talk to folks who want to have a career in design, let's say they're students or something, I usually tell them to work somewhere. I think there's like learning on someone else's dime and learning on someone else's time is like super valuable. I mean, I think there certainly are organizations that would be better at like coaching you and training you for whatever you want to do over the long run. But like, for example, at Billabong, they were very resourceful. So I had to learn a lot of things, and they were just a profitable company that wanted to keep headcount down and, not a lot of bloat and do well. And then at Nike, it seemed like it was just a much bigger organization, but what they were offering me was more a thinking process, like how to get from, sketch to completion and how to sell in your ideas. And a lot of that was just really valuable too. So I think like ultimately I would probably always tell folks to work inside of an organization first, so that they can kind of learn the trade and get their footing and get understanding, and also develop relationships. I mean, relationships are the thing that really ultimately get you to where you want to go. I mean, sometimes people would be like, hey, I want to get you, I want to get a job at this company. It's like, oh, I think I know somebody at that company, and let me just see if I can make an intro, and that has come from just kind of being around, I think the idea that you could just like get straight into building an apparel business on your own, it's possible. Some people do pick up the shovel, and then they can craft something amazing out of it. And I certainly know people in my, circles who have done stuff like that, but I think that's just a high risk scenario to like to jump straight into like, oh man, now I have an apparel company.
Right, yeah.
So I don't really know that there's any one right path, but like for me, I learned a ton in those first two businesses, and then on my own have learned a lot more about like, Shopify and marketing and how much product to buy and digital advertising and all these other things that I learned at those businesses or have to think about, so.
Yeah, for sure. I like that. Yeah. For me, when you talk about buying products, when I was 18 years old, I went to college, community college for about a half a semester, and then I dropped out. But most of my friends were like, when you graduate, sometimes your parents will get you like a gift or something for like graduating high school or whatever. And I remember all my friends got like laptops or whatever. And I got my first print run of my first CDs, like an album that I made. And I got 1,000 of these CDs made. And because it was like 1 cent more to get 1,000 versus 500 of them. And I swear, there's still boxes. This is over 10 years ago. There's still boxes of this CD just sitting around my mom's house back in my hometown. Because I didn't know what I was doing. And it's just like, oh, it's like a little bit cheaper to buy all this extra stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just like,
your unit cost. That's the thing. I mean, one of the things as creators or people who are makers or designers or artists or whatever you want to call them, people who just like, they want to make a craft and sell it to other people. What propels them is like a little bit of like the delusions of grandeur. And I think those things are actually like good things. Like ultimately those are good motivators for like making a thing. And I think what happens a lot of times when people either buy too deep and have too much is that they gave up or they lost steam on like the marketing side of it, the kind of like selling other people, or they get worn down from like trying to sell people on their idea, over time. I think there's a stick-to-itiveness that like most entrepreneurs need to have, or like a resilience or something, because you're going to get told no a lot, or you're going to get ignored a lot. And I think that's okay too. So like when we buy too deep, obviously I have an audience now, and if I throw it on sale, like it'll sell out. But like, all the time I'm making mistakes like that. There are things I'm like, dude, this design is a banger and everyone's going to love it. And I buy way too deep and no one wants it. And you'll find it on sale 6 months later. Right.
Yeah. But man, that must be tough though. How do you forecast that? That has to be a skill too. Cause I think that's a skill, and it doesn't have to be for clothing necessarily, but really kind of forecasting what will or won't work. Like, how do you get better at that?
Yeah, there's some, what do you call it, research and design, we have Chomp is ran in that is sort of a conversation between me and the audience, and they're interested in, hey, I'll ask them for like a suggestion on like, give me 2 emojis and I'll design something around 2 emojis, and it's like a snake and an anchor, and then I have to draw a snake and an anchor, right? And that's interesting. Then there's only getting to know your audience, what they're interested in. And a lot of times there are things that it's sort of like, I'll do one for them and they'll do one for me, kind of thing. Like, I know that you guys like this kind of thing, but I'm trying to get you to sort of refine or change your taste over time. It would be really bad if you leaned all the way into like the hits, so like sometimes you could scale a brand, but then you don't want to be known for really only like one look or one style. Because ultimately that's just, in the same way that if you're like investing in stocks or something, you don't want to be too invested in one stock. You'd like to be more diversified in terms of your looks. So, most businesses, even like, especially apparel businesses, they're making like most of their revenue off of like a couple styles, and then the remainder, they're barely moving. That's just like a standard. And so when you find out that like, oh shit, like such and such brand that I love is, they're making 60% of their income off of like one sock. You're like,
that's crazy.
Okay. So it's just a lot to learn. So everyone is kind of in that space. It's, for us, we sell like a lot of this like sunset skull thing. It's just very commercial looking thing, and it's cool. It's interesting. And a lot of people haven't seen it before. That itself will sell, a third of my entire business might be that. I don't know. You gotta look at the numbers.
For sure. That's super interesting. I like that idea of doing one for you and one for them. I think it may have been John Mayer who said that's how he approaches songwriting. Like when he's making a record, it's like every other song. This one's for me. This one's for popular world or whatever, for the hit radio song or whatever. I'm curious, have you ever gone too far one direction or the other?
Okay. Like think about like stand-up comedians and stuff, like how like there's some of my favorite stand-up comedians. I won't name any of them, but their first couple albums are so funny. Yeah. And then as their audience like gets to know them better, they kind of lead into like the thing that they were laughing the most about, and they lose a lot of like the kind of charm or weirdness of whatever that was compelling them before. And there's definitely like, there's sort of a one-to-one comparison for like all types of entertainment and apparel and stuff where things become, whatever they were selling before, they became ubiquitous, like in their line or their assortment that they were offering. So, for me, Chomp has never needed to feed anyone besides me. So like, I can just, no one can tell me shit. So like in my other day job, like I'm working with other people and they can tell me this is a good idea or a bad idea. And certainly people in my audience, then they kind of become a little bit like my boss. And they tell me, you know, this is good or bad, or bring back this other thing that we love so much. I mean, now there's like a couple hundred people with Chomp tattoos, like tattoos of the artwork on there.
That's
like,
amazing.
They send it to me all the time. Some of them are so good and some of them are so bad. And some of them are so big. This guy has like his whole thigh tattoo with a Chomp brand tattoo.
That's a big responsibility, dude.
I actually love it, man. I just want to see it on somebody's face. I like, I'll get these messages all the time where people are like, can I tattoo you? I'm like, dude, you should absolutely tattoo yourself with this stuff. Yeah. And so it's been happening since early on. Now they're not buying into the brand, but they're buying into the visual language of it, the concept, the pieces themselves, you know? Right. And I think that's actually really important because Chomp has no marketing. Like there's no marketing budget. Like I give some, you know, we spent $1,000 on an ad like last week or something like that, but really not that much. And there's no like athlete endorsement. It's not like LeBron is wearing Chomp like on his, you know, way to practice or some shit. So all the pieces had to be sort of made to sell. Like someone has to see it. They have to resound with the artwork. They have to get it right away. They have to think it's visually interesting. And then they're going to go and purchase it. And that, like, I don't have a relationship with the consumer who's looking at the artwork and they're still buying it. To me, that's how this brand was made to be. And honestly, that's kind of how I think about a lot of things now too, is like, what's it like to design something where there's no marketing behind it? You know, I mean, you look at something like Nike, it's basically all marketing. They can tell you that this swoosh is important. But like, if I just drew a swoosh, you know, me, literally lonely old Josh, who doesn't have, you know, billions to market a thing, no one's going to value it or think it's interesting. And so it's quite literally the opposite of something like Nike because it has to sell itself. You know? Yeah.
And I feel like the key there is just the authenticity. Like, I think that there's something, however goofy and corny that sounds, like I do think that is very real, of just like being true to yourself. And I think right now in the digital world, even just like, it's not even just sales necessarily. If you're making sales, that's one thing. It's like, cool, we're getting feedback to keep going a certain direction or to go a different direction. But even just like feedback online with like likes or no likes and things like that, like getting that type of feedback, I think it's really easy for creators to lose themselves right now, to stop being true to what makes them, why they started doing what they do in the first place.
I heard someone call that audience capture. And maybe that means, you know, meaning like you're only kind of playing to your audience, or once you get feedback in a very specific way about some very specific thing you're offering, you might lean all the way into it. Right. That's obviously, I'm just lucky that I didn't have like an overnight growth thing, because I could easily have that happen. And you watch it happen to people where like they make something that's really amazing and it gets a ton of eyeballs, and there's a ton of pressure to sort of make something equally amazing or equally the same aesthetic, you know? Right. And so I think, authenticity is interesting because, I mean, we all have these guiding principles by which we do stuff, and certainly getting attention or getting eyeballs or whatever is important. It's not, it's not like not important. You want people to resound with what you're making, but I think once the stakes get a little higher, there's a lot more mouths to feed, or, the attention like starts to dwindle or something. I do think people tend to lean into whatever's hot or whatever they think their audience is instead of some underlying principle.
Yeah. And I think that's not the best, and I feel like that just sets you up to quit. You have to really like love something, and it has to be truly, because I've been there personally, where I feel like I start almost pandering to what I think will work versus what I actually want to be making, Oh
man, the pandering. Yeah. There's just so much. We're kind of living in the age of pandering. And I think that's kind of okay. But I think like when you see everyone moving towards a trend, and it could be in how they talk, it could be in the design that they make or whatever, I think that's a great time to decide to totally pivot and avoid it. And like, I think that you should trust the instinct that once something is going to become like hit critical mass or become ubiquitous in all those places, it's not a place that you want to have leaned all the way into, you know?
Right.
And there are some people who might be known for a thing before that becomes popular. Let's try to give an example. Like, all these rappers are talking about, they rap in this like triplet form, you know, and this kind of thing. And it's very popular right now. But then there were some rappers who were kind of doing it before. And I think that they might, you know, like Future, somebody who might outlive the genre, but everyone else who hop into the trend a lot later, they're probably not going to be even as good over time. And I think of that in terms of the same way with like visual language, like whatever you're making, art making, once it hits ubiquity, like you gotta hop off it as fast as possible. Yeah. Authenticity is some part of that, you know, like do you have stuff to say, you know, or like, do you have a good process for coming up with ideas and executing on those ideas that, you know, can produce new ideas each time? I mean, that's a special thing that I'm always like refining internally is how do I come up with ideas?
Right.
And I think like challenging myself to make new visual art that doesn't look like what I made before, that's one way, you know? Yeah. So like a few years ago, I started messing with this airbrush. I was trying to capture like these 80s ads that were just like Pepsi and like Bud Light. And like, these things are gorgeous. You can find a million of them, you know, on Pinterest or Google or whatever. And these people who are illustrating them, they're fucking masters at like what they do. Like they're qualified illustrators who are so good. They're doing those ads, and then they're doing movie posters for like the biggest movies at that time, right? And they're doing Mad TV covers and that kind of thing. And for me, I always like looked at those guys and was like, you know, or women, you know, like these are masters of the trade. I want to be like them. I want to keep learning. So there's an underlying core foundation for me that I just want to see how things are made and see if I can make something that looks rad in this way. And so every couple months, I'm like, hey, I'm art directing something. Okay, I want to try and make something that looks like Jack Davis, you know, or I want to make something that looks like Phil Roberts, who's like he's like a surf illustrator. I want to make something that looks like airbrush art. And I think those are that's why the brand I think is surviving now, is that like people resound with like whatever new art styles. But the underlying DNA of like, what am I communicating? Like the story, that actually can be fixed. You know, like meaning stationary, like like we're communicating these messages over time, and those are the things that work. But the visual language is changing all the time. Yeah, the art direction, if you will. You know,
for sure. No, that makes sense.
I went on a long tear there. I probably make more jokes.
No, keep them long, dude. It's good. It's really good. Hey everyone, we'll be right back with the episode, but really quick, I have to tell you about Riverside, the leading podcast and video platform in the world. And truthfully, we love Riverside, and we used it way before we even talked to them about becoming a sponsor for literally every episode of Make Something Cool. We cannot do what we do without it. And the reason we love it so much is it's a lot like Zoom, but I can record much higher quality audio and video on their platform. And what's amazing is it doesn't matter where the guest is located. It sounds like we're sitting in the room together while we're recording. It's amazing. And so right after you're done recording, you download separate audio and video tracks from the Riverside platform, and you can easily edit your content from within the online platform if you want. It's so easy. It's seamless. We use it all the time. Josh, my producer, he's in Riverside editing, gathering files, and it makes all of our process so seamless and easy every single week. And we're not the only ones who love Riverside. There are over 70,000 people, ranging from individual creators to the big podcasts like Guy Raz, Gary Vee, Spotify, the New York Times. And the reason why so many people are switching to Riverside is because it's really, really good and easy and simple to use. So please go check them out today. You can hit the link in the description of the show notes, or you can just head over to riverside.fm, create an account, and get started today. Okay, back to the episode. I'm curious, what's a trend in design specifically that maybe you saw, and you saw everyone kind of going that direction? You're like, I'm not doing this. This is not me. Like, what's an example of that in design for you?
Okay, well, like if there's a trend, it's like kind of like right away. If I see it in like 4 or 5 places, like I know right away I'm not going to mess with that at all.
Okay.
And there are things like, I mean, I could name specific trends, but like if it's easy to do and easy to replicate, I'm going to completely avoid it because it won't be a thing that I can own. Do you know what I'm saying?
Wow, that's a great way to put it.
Like I sometimes talk about ownability or like something that's proprietary to the look and feel about a brand. And if it's like really, really simple and let's say like people harp on flat illustration, and I don't think of it as good or bad. It just seems like art direction to me. But because it doesn't really take a lot of time, or it's not really like super labor intensive to make, then I think it can be replicated by a lot of other illustrators who are totally qualified and talented.
What's flat illustration? Just to
good
clarify.
Question, man. It's it's kind of an arbitrary term. It's
is that like the comic book looking?
We don't really have anything that looks like it around. I mean, it was picked up by kind of tech companies, It was like, this really flat one color.
Yeah, it's that generic like persona of a person with like very little details, just like,
Yeah. And honestly, I don't look down on that style of illustration really or anything. It's not like a thing I want to lean into personally, but
sure.
But I just kind of noticed it. And like when something doesn't take a long time to make, or people can easily figure out how to make it, then I think that's the thing that I'll probably like, my underlying principles will tell me to like avoid that. But it also goes down to like, I just want to know how things are made. Like I want to try to make something complex. And we kind of live in the era of like really fast content marketing. Like, let me see if I can do a phrase or a saying or something really quick. And I've just tried to sort of avoid that, like, because I'm a quality over quantity person.
Yeah.
Now, I think you could probably grow a much bigger following if you're reusing assets or reusing color palettes or what these things that might just be really easy to make something a lot quicker. These, ingredients, if you will. Yeah. But I have just thought that every time I saw something simple or easy, then I should kind of try to avoid that. And then if I saw something very, very popular, I would also try to avoid that. But like, then there's like humor. Like, I don't know, just the time that I made my brand, or even on me on Twitter, is like, I just think it's more fun to have a good time, like that's all I care about is like, and I care about like mentoring students and helping and lift them up. There's obviously some philanthropic interest I have in the design community, but then there's like, really, I just want to have a good time. And, and I think a lot of like the era in which Chomp was sort of born out of was just a very serious era. Like it was like people who like were dressing like they are farmers or some shit. And they have these phrases where they're like, explore more, like get outside. And I was just like, fuck all these fake cowboys. Like, I'm like, it's fun. Authenticity's not a value to me, but it's just once something hit that critical mass, I was like, let's just make jokes. Let's just have a good time. Like I would rather, and I kind of grew up in the era of like, tongue in cheek, skate brands or surf brands. And they just had a lot of vibrance to them. And it was kind of punk to me. So I just was never going to pretend to be a farmer.
For sure. No, I like that a lot. Did you grow up skating?
Yeah. I mean, I was like kind of a casual skater. I skated with all my friends and stuff, street skate. We didn't have all these parks and stuff. So, and so I still skate now with my daughter and friends here and there, but I'm not super coarse skater. Like, you're not going to see me like tray flip down like a seventh pair, but I'll cruise the bowl with some friends and stuff.
Nice.
But it's not, the art is really what's important to me, the art and the tone, It's like, not, I mean, if whatever you do it with passion, but like for me, I just want to make fun stuff.
For sure. No, I like that. I mean, it has to be fun. That's a great way to put it. I also think like what you said was, I don't think I've heard anybody put it that way before. And I really like it, that that's almost like a good mental note for creators and myself to even think about, like, is this easy to replicate? And is there easy access to making it? And like, is it just going to be easy for other people to do this? And is it getting really popular really quickly? As like a few barometers of like, all right, is this worth me getting into it? Or will I just create more noise? And I'm just like jumping on a trend that'll be gone in a matter of months or a year or whatever, like very short-term thinking. And just trying to think a little bit more long-term about like what you want your full scope to look like of your career and your craft. I like that a lot. I guess I had never thought of the easily repeatable thing. Like somebody can just do it. And I think that, it goes across the board for illustration, but also any other creative endeavor. Like if there's a trend happening that's really easy to replicate, probably avoid that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, there's some steady, one-to-one, you could think of it in musical terms too. Like there's obviously there's rap that's easier to make. There's music that's easier to make. Like almost no kids like really know how to make music with an instrument anymore. They just know how to make digital stuff. And that's good because they can get their music out there a lot quicker. But arrangement and musical theory and all those things sort of like, I find myself like being drawn to a lot of that stuff. And it's kind of a lot, now it's sort of lacking in popular music altogether. And so like, I'll go back and listen to like, let's say like, the yacht rock, actually the Footloose guy, Kenny Loggins. I'll go back and listen to Kenny Loggins, and Kenny Loggins really understands arrangement. Like he understands like modulation, and he changes musical keys, and he knows how to play lead guitar. And like, there's something very interesting where he was making pop songs that were like difficult to play, you know, and like, there probably still are some musicians that like exist, who are famous, who can do stuff like that. But there probably was this era, I think, where maybe I'm just being nostalgic, where I was just like, these guys are just masters of like, of understanding instrumentation, arrangement, and accompaniment, and whatever other thing, you know. So I am just a nerd on that stuff, the technical aspects, the sort of, you know, foundational parts to making illustrations, or the foundational parts of making music.
For sure.
So that's what I'm always kind of like leaning into. But you know, people like Bob Dylan, and you know, Bob Dylan he plays like 4 chords.
Exactly. True.
To sing a melody.
Right. That's so true. Yeah. I think that, I mean, with the internet, it's like, it's really, it's like the best thing ever, because it's democratized access to putting work out there. Like anybody can do basically, you know, you can have your phone, or you can have like one MIDI controller and make awesome beats. You don't need a full band to do stuff like that anymore. But at the same time, that makes a lot of noise. You know what I mean? So because anyone can, everyone will. And so the real differentiator over time has to be either quality or uniqueness, or something that makes you kind of cut through the noise, because it is just like, I mean, it's the best thing ever that everyone can do it and anyone can do it, but it makes the competition way higher than probably generations before us, because now the whole thing comes down to, well, you're competing against hundreds of thousands of people versus 100, you know?
Yeah, it's much more of a global scale. I think I'm glad I didn't have the pressure of the internet when I was like early on in my career. It was kind of nice to be able to make things without whether someone's going to like it or not. You know, it was just like, do I like it, or does my boss like it, or do my mentors think what I'm making is good? And I thought that was kind of a better feedback loop for, you know, whether you're making interesting stuff. I mean, I was thinking about like Post Malone was kind of like the SoundCloud artist who came out, who like seems to understand a lot about, you know, how to play guitar and make music and that kind of thing. And so there definitely are really good things that are coming out of kind of the instant access to putting your music out there. But I do feel for the young creators who like feel this like need to like, I made it, so 100%. I need to put it on the internet, and so I need to like get likes and build a following and a brand. And I think there should be just really fun kind of incubation, exploratory process where you don't have the pressure whether people like you or not.
100%. No, it's huge. That seriously matters a lot. You can't find your voice if you're constantly concerned what everyone's thinking of you, and if they hate you or like you or whatever, like you don't have that space to explore.
And there are mean people on the internet, man. There's a lot of jerks.
Yeah,
so like,
for sure.
I mean, it's like going to the gym for like one time and then having to like do a fitness competition. It's like, obviously you don't do that. Like you go work out, and you work out over time, and then hopefully you see results, you know. Yeah. I'm not going to do any fitness competitions, that's for sure.
For sure. Me either. Not anytime soon. I'm curious, maybe I wanted to get to this, and I know we've talked a little bit more about like Chomp and the apparel side of what you do, but I'm curious about, you know, like you mentioned the bike in the back, like you've done some really cool collaborations with New Belgium recently, and you do like really big brand work. And that's one thing I spoke to Emily. She's the co-founder of Red Antler. They're like a giant ad and branding agency. She was on the podcast a little while ago. And that's the only time I ever really got into the branding side. But I would like to touch on it with you of like, how do you approach branding like a project like that? Like when you're talking to, you know, a New Belgium, like that's a massive brand that's been around for a super long time. Like, how do you approach a project like that? Like what do you walk into that thinking? And maybe like, the more of these projects you've done, what are some things you've learned about the process that might be helpful to someone who would walk into that?
Well, I think like one thing that's good for any project would be having them genuinely interested in you because they think that you're good at what you do, right? Mm-hmm. So like there's just like nice thing that happens where someone walks up to you and like, hey, I think you're cute. Do you want to go on a date? It's like this fun, like I have value to them and they like what I'm making as a foundation. And that part's like, that's so helpful, man.
Yeah.
And New Belgium is like the perfect brand to partner with because they're both like a multinational distributed beer company with like labels underneath them and sister brands and whatever, but their internal decision-making team is very small. So there's just not a lot of people who need to sign off on something. And there's a lot of like trust and autonomy between the people. And I'm projecting too much, but it didn't take that much for me to get my ideas sold in. They were just like, we trust that you're making something and whatever. So working with them is just like, it was mostly just a fun, easy process. So I would say most of the brands that I'm designing with now, it's kind of that type of relationship. The person who is hiring me also can sign off on it. And there's just not a lot of people in the room that need to sign off on stuff. And that gets really helpful. And then having some reputation that people like what you're making already, it's just like,
they're hiring you for a reason because they know what you're going to bring to the table. Right.
Yeah. I think like a lot of agencies or if you're new to freelance or whatever, you have to sell, so you're like, in an agency world, you might have a business development guy who's like, we're offering all these services and you got to pick us. And like, your portfolio is good, but like, why are they picking you over their agency of record or any other agency? Like that thing, or that sales tool, I don't have to do it as much because I don't have the overhead. So I don't need like, we got to bring in $200,000 this month. Like I just don't have that kind of pressure. And two, I think I do a very specific type of like, I just work on the front end visuals, brand stuff. I don't have this whole apparatus inside of here that needs to do digital marketing, ad spend, media buys, all this other stuff that like agencies might offer. Right. So it's one part about relationships, just getting to know people and getting to like people and knowing who can hire you and who has a budget spend. That's a very specific like band of people in an organization. Getting to know those people well, that's the thing that kind of will pay you dividends. Yeah. So I think like young freelancers will always be like, I always hear this dumbass advice from people where they're just like, you should post more on Instagram. And I'm like, I don't know what people are saying. Like that's a billboard as far as I'm concerned. That's you put up a picket sign and that's great. And you hoped that people drove by it, but like, that's not great business development tool. Like just relationships, meeting people who have budgets, like getting in contact with them directly, showing them exactly what you do, taking your time, not being too, in their face about trying to hire you, but posting more on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, those things are fun. You'll get some validation there, but unless you feel like you can scale to 10,000 followers or 20,000 followers, something like that, you're not going to see a return. Right. So if you need to make money tomorrow, like I would just tell you, get in touch with people who have budgets.
Yes.
Sell to those people,
I'm so glad you said that. I feel like that's such a misconception. Like for when I got started with my, we moved out to New York, my wife was holding it down financially for us. She had like, a job and I was going freelance for the first time during that period. And I remember, hearing similar things. Like if you're going out freelance, like you need to post, you have to have all the social media presence and all this stuff. And I tried it for a minute and nothing really changed. But what really started changing is when I started cold emailing people who needed help, who clearly had a need for what I was good at, which was editing podcasts and producing podcasts. Like I would literally, if I listened to a podcast and it didn't sound good, I would just write that person an email, say, hey, pay me $50 for this episode and I'll make it sound good for you. That's how I was able to do that. And it's but no one really talks about that because it's so unsexy to be like, yeah, you have to go send 100 cold emails, like or whatever.
Man, yeah, that'd been, dude. I feel like you're preaching my message, man. And that's what I tell folks. I mean, that's what's worked for me. Like, it's just relationships. Cold emails, explaining exactly what you do in a very short way. And how to get in contact with you. That's great. I mean, I think there is a salesy tool to that, which is like making it not convoluted what you do. Like, how easily you can help somebody. Just saying, hey, I can make your audio a lot better. Like just, I'll do it for $500 or whatever. Or, and okay, cool. We'll just hand you the audio file. You tweak it, whatever, you give some advice. Cool. You're hired, move on to the next one. It's like in college and high school, I would hang these door hangers that were like for pizza and for restaurants and stuff. And like, that's like, that works great because like you went to them, you made it obvious the service that you're offering. It's like very blue collar. It's great. Like people need design services. Like you just need to find who those people are. So I think like it's cool to get likes on whatever thing you posted on the internet, but like ultimately, I don't think that pays as many, especially if it's small following, it doesn't pay as many dividends as like, just knowing somebody who has a budget.
Yeah, for sure. I like that a lot. I think that that's like a real trap, is to want to be white collar in your creative work too soon. You know what I mean? Like, I think that I've never heard it put that way, that it's a very blue collar beginning to just like, you have to go do grunt work and you have to make it's not going to be easy,
Well, I'm a pragmatist, man. I think you just like, it's just levels, steps to get to the thing that you want to.
Yeah.
And everyone in my industry, especially who are high up, they talk in these weird magical ways, like where it just like the language is hard to understand. It sounds like almost kind of scientific,
made up jargon language,
just jargon. And like, as soon as I hear it, I'm like, what are these people saying? It's just like, when I talk to people, it's like, hey, I want to get another job. I don't like the job I'm in. And then I'm just like, hey, here's what I think you should do. Just refine these pieces, show the work that you want to get, and then apply them this way. And I think usually works.
Yeah.
So I think advice en masse too, like taking advice from, like a book or someone on stage, right? I mean, there's going to be some advice that works really good for some people, but I think usually where you're at, you'll need like very specific steps to like how to get to the next thing that you want,
Yeah, for sure. And thinking your path will look like some, if you're trying to be, I don't know who's a crazy success, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like if you, like his story is so insane. And like, if you try and emulate his story to success, you will probably not make it, because his story is so weird and full of luck. And he is like all these different things that just lined up, like in the way that his life played out. And he worked for it, but it's like, and he's been like a millionaire in like 3 different industries. Like, he's just a crazy, like, person all the way around. And so if you try and copy his journey, it's like, you're probably you should do your own journey. You know what I mean?
And I think that when I was young, I thought my career would look more like, I was looking at Asterisk Studios, which is like this design studio in Seattle, and they're defunct now because 2 of the guys moved on to do Invisible Creature, and then the other 2 I think started Visco or VSCO or whatever. And when I was in school, they were major motivators for me. I was just looking at that work and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do album art for metal bands.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's like, and then I ended up making mostly socks, for like 2 eras, 2 years of my freelance career. I was doing like, like Star Wars socks and NBA socks. And these things are cool because I love stance. But, and honestly, when I look at that work, I'm like, if I had shown that to my previous self, the one that was in college, that previous self would have never imagined those are the kinds of things that I would be doing in my career. And they're just as fun for me.
Sure.
But that industry didn't exist. That company didn't exist. And turns out that there's not really metal bands anymore.
Right, exactly.
I mean, there are metal bands, there's still the metal bands, but they weren't reaching the apex they were before. If I really thought that I was going to be doing album artwork, I would have emulated, I could have easily been disappointed because I wasn't doing a ton of visual art for albums. But at the same time, like, that living your own path and kind of trusting that eventually like more interesting things will come along, or different interesting things rather. That's just, dude, I designed a bicycle. Like, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I put artwork on surfboards. Like, none of these things, like, no one told me in school, like, you should be mocking up your work on a bicycle or marking up your work on surfboards. Like, it's just like, I decided, like, graphics to me on anything, it just bums me out that people don't think in those ways. Like, I wish that they would just realize that every single thing on the planet could be more interesting or aesthetically made.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's true. Yeah. Assuming that your journey is going to turn out in a very specific way, you kind of have to hold it a little bit more loosely and just trust that, making the right choices, making the right decisions, and staying true to yourself and working your ass off. That combination of things will probably get you somewhere really, really good, but maybe not where you envisioned 10 years ago when you first had this dream or whatever.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, there's just so many people I knew end up doing interesting, weird stuff like later in design because they were just kind of open to those opportunities. I mean, there's so many times where somebody was like, well, I'm going to start this kind of brand. I'm like, I don't think it's going to work. And then it works. And you're like, that's so cool that there's just like new industry, new opportunity in that way,
For sure. Yeah. I think maybe to start wrapping it up, I would love to hear maybe, and you've said a lot of really good and really helpful things, but I'm curious, maybe you could say it to a broader creator person. This could be someone who makes videos, someone who makes podcasts, someone who designs more closely to like what you work on. But I'm curious, like for you, what is something, because I know you mentioned earlier, like your work in philanthropy, helping designers and things like that, and mentoring younger designers and things along those lines. Like what is some piece of advice or pieces of advice that you give to early creators when they're first trying to get their start, or when they're trying to figure out what they want to do? Like what are some of those, like your real top level pieces of advice you give to early creators when they want to get started?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that when someone is looking to hire someone who's new to their craft, they just mostly want a proof that they can do it, that the proof that they know how to use the tools, either the applications or whatever it is that they're executing on. Let's say you're a musician. They want to know that you know how to play your instrument or record yourself well. I mean, there are a lot of there are a lot of players like on Fiverr and stuff who will sub in on your drums and that kind of thing. But people just want to know that you can do the thing. And they want to also know this other thing is that you have taste, like you have some semblance of a little bit of the history of the thing you're doing and a little bit of knowledge about what's happening, in terms of the trends overall. And just those two things, having pretty good taste and being qualified and using the baseline, whatever software it is, or whatever the instrument is, or whatever your tools are, those two things alone will get you what you need in like right out of school. So a lot of times when I'm looking at portfolios, I don't have some expectation, that visual designers will have it all figured out when they're just starting out. But like sometimes you'll meet kids who have really great taste and they know they're just very forward thinkers. And then sometimes you'll have like the craftsperson who just really understands Photoshop, or really understands how to draw, or really whatever. Yeah. And it's still kind of, you need to always sort of marry these skills. And the other thing is that like people are busy. So like they don't reply to you and they don't get back to you. And like, I'm busy and I was like 10 minutes late for this interview that I really wanted to be at because like I have a kid that I had to hand over. Right. So there's like, people just don't reply to emails. They might forget about you. They might forget that they met you. And none of that's really like personal, it's really, you talked about sending 100 cold emails. If you need a job tomorrow, then I would recommend doing that. You're going to hear back from like 5% of those people, and maybe 1% of them might have an opportunity from you, and no one's going to be mean to you. I mean, it's very unlikely that someone would like berate you over email that they didn't like your portfolio. Like if they did that, they have something wrong with them. And there's definitely a reason why you don't want to work there, But I think the fear of reaching out like stops a lot of folks, and definitely don't put all your eggs in like, I applied for one job today, that kind of thing. Like it's just a job job application is like a wishing well. The other thing is that like just who getting to know people, being nice, being courteous, being easy to work with. Those things get you really, really far. Taking good feedback, taking notes, whatever thing that I tell a young designer, they should really just be ready to just kind of be a sponge. The other thing is that like, you shouldn't have an expectation that you need to be famous on the internet. Like you just don't need to have a huge following. That's like, it's fine if you want that, if that's like the way that you want to live your job. But there are certainly plenty of people making good creative work, interesting work, and good money, who don't have like a large online presence, and they don't need to. And the pressure of that, like the pressure to put your work on the internet, I think that's really strange. And I don't think it should exist. I don't feel pressure to put my work on the internet. I mean, I do, but like, it's not really, even for me, like people who are coming to find me, like it's a lot of word of mouth. About half of it's word of mouth. The other half is like people I reached out to or made contact with and have either worked with in the past, or they like my portfolio and they want to move forward, So I do get DMs like, hey, will you design me a logo? Or how much for a logo? That's all. Those words. And like, that's just not a great means of business development, hoping for DMs. And then, I think those, just stick to it. Over time, if you do anything for 8 hours a day for 40 hours a week, you get better at it. And so like, you'll suck for a little bit, but like, you'll just keep leveling up and eventually become good at it. I mean, it's just every single job in the world would be like that. You'll just continue to get better over time.
Man, that's good.
Yeah, that's a lot of advice. That's what I would tell young people.
No, that's great. I love that idea of, taste and craft, like having to be, in sync with one another. Cause I definitely feel like for me, in certain times I've been more on one side or the other and it never really works out. And so having both of those qualities, but then also just the stick to itiveness, like you had mentioned, just like being willing to be resilient, because like you said, people are busy and you're probably going to get told no a lot, but it's the very, very few, that 1% that says yes, that can really change everything for you.
Look, I haven't been fired from any freelance jobs except for one. And it was a local brand around here. It was a new brand and barely existed when they hired me. And then I got fired off it. And now I see it everywhere. So like I see it all the time. I see it on signs. I get ads for it.
Wow.
I see it distributed places that I'll be. And I'm old enough now that I have those kinds of stories where like the thing that I either didn't do a great job of or a thing I made a mistake, like it just, it can kind of haunt me a little bit later or I see, and it's just, we have to be able to like laugh at those things. It's hilarious that like, and just everyone has stories like that, people miss out on jobs or people misspell something that ends up somewhere. And I think it's okay to like, the expectation you can avoid failure or avoid something that might sting is just like impossible.
For sure.
But
man, that's what I got. No, that's so good. It's good to hear too. That like, I'm sure they're normalizing like some of that, like those stories of failing or whatever, of things going wrong. Like that's also just a really healthy thing. So I'm sorry that you're getting targeted ads from that brand though. That does kind of suck.
Honestly, it's hilarious.
Okay, cool. Well, Joshua, thanks again for being on. I think this is a really, really cool conversation. It's going to help a lot of people. Where do you want people to go find you? I mean, obviously go check out Chomp, the clothing company, follow you on Twitter. Is there anything else you have going on that you want to direct people to?
No, that's great. chompbrand.com or follow Chomp Brand on Instagram. And then me personally, Joshua-Ariza on both Instagram and Twitter. I don't know. I think this has been great, man. Thanks for having me. This is really, maybe those two things. That's all I got to sell.
Okay. Sounds good. And my real last question, are you going to make those sick button down things you posted? They were like these mock-up. Yeah. Those are so good, dude.
I did those for a specific retailer and I think that they are going to purchase them. So I just needed someone to give me some assurance that I could sell at least some portion of them. And then, I'm going to make them for sure.
All right. Heck yeah. I'll be your first customer. So cool. Well, Joshua, thanks for being here. And thank you to everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and want to get more of these conversations sent directly to your inbox, head over to my website, alexsugg.com. You can sign up for the newsletter. And as always, please go leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts for this show. That really helps us out. And last but not least, this episode was edited and produced by Josh Perez. And if you're looking for help with your podcast, Josh is the guy. He's a great producer and an even better dude. So please get in touch with him at justjoshperez.com. I'll be back soon with another new episode. So until then, let's go make something cool. This episode of Make Something Cool was brought to you by Riverside, the leading podcast and video recording platform. To learn more, check out the link in the show notes or the description of this video or podcast.